Hello, and you're very welcome to The Week That Really Was. My name is John McGurk. I'm the editor of Gript Media. I am joined by, as ever, my friend and colleague, Sarah Ryan. Sarah, I haven't had a great day. How was yours?
Oh, John, you're grand. Mine was fine. I would say I'm not enjoying this week for a variety of reasons, which we will get into over the course of this podcast. But I think overall it's been a pretty depressing week all around. Would you?
It has. But I want to, because, and we will talk about all of the events of the week in this podcast, but I think listeners tuning in might expect us to address the large white creature with a trunk sitting in the corner of the room, which is that I made today for the first time, I think, in the 4 years that I've been editor of Gript, and the first time in the 23,500 stories we published over that period. One of them made the RTE 61 news. And all we had to do to achieve that was to get something wrong. I think it is important to say that just for the very few people in the country who don't know, on Wednesday evening of this week, Gript Media published a story which outlined the immigration history and how somebody came into possession of Irish citizenship of a person who we believed, on the basis of what I consider to be very good and strong sourcing, to have been the main person of interest in last Thursday's horrible attack in Dublin City. And then this morning at 9:16 a.m., we got an email from the Garda Press Office. And then 10 a.m., I got a phone call from a Garda Press officer informing me that the Gardaí were formally denying that person, who we had not named, identified, provided a photograph or anything like that, that person was not, in fact, the person who is a person of interest in the ongoing investigation into that horrible tragedy. So obviously, when you get something like that wrong, that is a major error. And we're obviously investigating all the factors that led to us getting that wrong. I've had some conversations with my sources today in relation to, I'm referring to them as sources just because I don't want to identify anybody, obviously.
But there was more. There was more than one.
There was more than one, and they're not people of insignificance. Let's put it that way. So that's what happened. It's been a sucky day for me, because I obviously am the editor. I feel terribly responsible for what happened. I feel terribly responsible for the flack that my colleagues are taking as a result. I really feel awful that somebody, and I want to make this clear, we didn't identify anybody. I would never have identified somebody by name. I would never have published a photograph until somebody's been charged with a crime. But other people, subsequently to our reporting, identified this person. And, if as the Gardaí say, that person has no case to answer, then that's obviously awful for them as well. So yeah, it's just been a sucky day all around, Sarah.
I mean, yeah, like I saw a lot of the chatter online about people thinking it was a setup and stuff, but
well, that is because just to be clear, this morning what I said or what Gript said, although I signed off on it, was that obviously if it transpired that our sources had lied to us, then there would be consequences for that, and that I would consider their anonymity and their right to being protected to be forfeit. And a lot of journalists reacted quite strongly to that. But it is a fact. Like, if somebody deliberately misleads a media outlet into running a false story, and I'm not saying that's what happened here, but if it were the case, then yes, their right to anonymity would be forfeit.
I don't think, and I'm not going to name any of the journalists, one in particular I'm thinking of who, clutched their pearls in response to that. I really don't think they would keep a source quiet themselves if it was reversed. Do you know what I mean? If they thought that the person deliberately missed them in order to print something that was incorrect.
Well, I would hope they wouldn't, because there should be consequences for that kind of behavior in the media if it were to be uncovered. There should be consequences. I mean, you can't, because like if somebody deliberately lied to me, and again, not saying that happened, but since we're talking about the hypothetical, that were to happen, then they're not only risking my career, they're also risking Ben Scallon's and Fatima Gunning's and Gary Kavanagh's, and everyone else on our team is impacted by that. So yeah, there should be consequences for that if that was the kind of thing that happened. So I don't regret saying that. And I don't think it should be a case. I mean, I think the protection of sources is sacrosanct with that caveat. If somebody deliberately misleads you into doing something, then I think they've forfeited that right in general. And I think it's an important caveat.
So really, it's just like it's just a crap day all around. But ultimately, we've seen across the board in the media in Ireland in the last year, or maybe over a year, the Irish Times ran a story entirely written by AI with a fake photo and the whole thing, and ran that predominantly. There's been multiple other things. Were the Longford, the teachers, where most journalists and politicians commented on a story that turned out to not be true about male teachers asking the girls not to wear short skirts or whatever the details were of that.
There was also. I mean, I don't want to get into other people do it. I don't want our standards should not be we're as bad as everyone else. But like there was also the case of the meteorite hitting the beach in Clontarf. I don't know if you remember that one.
Oh, I forgot about that.
There've been various.
No, but that's not the point I'm making. The point I'm making is that everybody in like people in media and people who are editors and people who write things, they have crap days. Things happen, and it's really crap. And it's unfortunate. And, it's unfortunate that other journalists seem to be getting a lot of glee out of it. But look, we move on.
Look, there's a couple of things here. First of all, I think it's really important not to downplay it. It was, however, a story that was, I mean, I want to say this about the story was not conceived as being about the crime that took place last Thursday. It was actually a story about the immigration system and how somebody could come to be an Irish citizen, having had their deportation order, confirmed 3 times, and be, have taken multiple cases against it, been rejected every time, and yet somehow still end up an Irish citizen. And
that in itself is a story. Yeah,
that in itself, I think, is a legitimate matter of public interest. Now, obviously, the whole story has had to go because of the major issue with it, which is quite clear.
pretty major, yeah.
But that said, it wasn't conceived as being a story about the crime per se, but a story about the immigration process. I also want to say, people have ignored this today, but that story made absolutely clear in terms of identifying people. We don't identify suspects. We don't publish their photograph. And we also made absolutely clear that the suspect in this case is in a hospital in Dublin where he is being guarded by Gardaí. So the idea that some people have been postulating today that there's some guy walking around Dublin who could conceivably been identified by somebody reading a Gript media report who would assume that he had attacked children last week doesn't hold water for me. Because, I mean, everyone knows, the world and its mother knows, that the actual suspect is in hospital. So if you're walking around the streets, you're not a suspect in this case. But that said, that doesn't excuse the mistake. I've apologized for it in public to our readers, but to the people who listen to this podcast and who do contribute and support Gript because of our journalism, I want to apologize to all of you because you have a right to expect higher standards, and in this case, we let you down, and I'm sorry about that. Anyway, I was on telly the other night.
Yeah, it's been a week, John. It's been a week. You were on TV the other night, and you were very good. But I obviously would say that, wouldn't I? But I came away. So you were on with Hazel Chu. Who else?
Senator Marie Sherlock and Fianna Fáil Deputy James Lawless.
So first of all, I was kind of struck by the fact that it's 3 against, including if you include the presenter, it's everyone against you, right? Which, is par for the course in Ireland these days, to be honest, but it's just kind of irritating. Second of all, I just thought, well, you held your own very well, but Hazel Chu, listen, let me just preface this. I'm not a fan of Hazel Chu at all. I think that Hazel Chu, I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong here, John, but basically saying on national television that it's up to the media to decide what information is in the public interest to hear. Would that be a fair?
That was said. I just want to say that I too am not a fan of Hazel Chu. I'm not a fan of her politics. I'm not a fan of her view of the world. But I just want to say that in the green room before the show, she was perfectly charming and a nice person. And there are people behind the Sorry, I'm not saying you're suggesting anything to the contrary either, but I just want to say, like, you know.
Oh no, I mean, to be fair, over the years that I've been involved in politics, like when I say I'm not a fan of Hazel Chu, I mean her politics. Over the years that I've met people in different walks of political ideology, it's very. I could literally count on one hand the amount the people that I have found to be objectionable in terms of being rude or unpleasant or whatever. It's most people in politics. It's like this thing that you see online, like, oh, Leo Varadkar hates Ireland. You know, this nonsense. No, he doesn't. No, he doesn't.
It's very hard to get. It's very hard to get elected if you're a rude person or if you're an unpleasant person. That's
that's true. But nobody hates Ireland. Like, everybody has different views of how the country should be run. But like, let's not, whatever. So anyway,
Hazel's views are that the media should promote unity. That's what she said. That in the context of our previous story, which is entirely, by the way, because some people are conflating this today. The suspect in this case is an Algerian national who became a naturalized Irish citizen. That is not in dispute. We reported that fact. Hazel said we shouldn't have reported it because she thought it undermined the cause of national unity. It was an interesting perspective. Do you think she was right?
No. And Hazel and others on the panel also believe that the riots that happened last week are as a result of an far right and the fact that Gript published the fact that the person was Algerian. And listen, there's 100 different topics here and there's 100 different conversations. I was literally talking about this to a guard today. 95% of the people who are smashing open Foot Locker were not radicalized by the far right. They're just have a go people who are smashing up the place because they see an opportunity. Mm-hmm. That's a hill I will die on, and it is what it is. And Hazel and the entire panel, the entire focus was on how Gript just whipped everybody up into a frenzy, and the riots are all your fault. And you have maybe a little flute or a little bat signal that you shine up into the sky from the Gript headquarters and rally all of your troops to do things to your, that you asked them to do. Nonsense. I thought that the standard of opinions and the actual getting into the nitty gritty of what's happening to Ireland and why different things are happening and why different groups of people are frustrated and why they're behaving a certain way. As a debate about that, it was so unbelievably substandard. It was maddening. And, I thought you did well to hold off the arguments, John, but ultimately I came away from it kind of just a bit disappointed that we deserve better than three people agreeing with each other, rounding on another person and blaming them for everything and never actually getting into the real, meat of why things are happening in Ireland. These are the people who would have been on TV, 6 months ago, as I said before, saying, or whenever it was, saying that it was, terrible to suggest that there was a problem in the inner city with people, with violence. And now that's all gone because there's a new agenda in town. And I just think that over the week, every radio show I tuned into, every TV, far right, far right, far right, far right, far right. And it's just so unbelievably lazy and, real thinking, not done, real exploring. I'm stunned to be saying this, but Lynn Ruane, who's not a person who I agree with politically at all or whatever, was the first person I heard today talking about how, that people in the inner city shouldn't be called scumbags, etc., and that there's, maybe conversations need to be had, difficult conversations need to be had with people about, immigration and the issues that are affecting them in their day-to-day lives.
Yeah.
But instead it's just a little circle of wokesters all patting each other on the back to see who can outdo themselves on the Tonight Show, on how unbelievably progressive and not racist and amazingly, profoundly morally superior they all are, without ever actually having any real conversations about. I haven't spoken to a person in real life in the last week who doesn't have a more nuanced view of what's going on in Ireland in the last week than Hazel Chu did on that TV show.
Yeah, it's interesting because just in terms of being on TV, right? So it's a kind of a frustrating experience and yet kind of a predictable one because I knew going up, because I drove up that night and I drove home again. One of the things that's interesting is I knew what they were all going to say, because you live in a country where theirs is the dominant ideology and the dominant narrative, and you literally can't turn on the radio without hearing it. So you know exactly what points they're going to make. And the one advantage you have in that 4-on-1, 3.5-on-1, if you count Keira Doherty, who by the way I like. She's a capable journalist with her views, and not disputing her integrity or professionalism, but I think her position on this is quite clear. They had no idea what points I was going to make in response, and there seems to be this kind of sense that, well, we just say that what you did was a disgrace and undermined unity, that's the end of the argument. Well, hold on, no, because your argument doesn't make any sense. If the fact that this person's nationality was irrelevant, then surely the nationality of the individual who intervened to save lives was also irrelevant. But no, the media broadcast his nationality, and by the way, I was the first person to report that. His nationality right across the papers the next day, and I think €600,000 has been raised for him, because he is rightly a hero, regardless of his nationality. The nationality of the other of the person on the complete other side of the moral spectrum, the person who committed this attack, is also transparently relevant. It was relevant enough for a source to ring me up and say, this is his nationality, and we think it might be relevant. I don't think I have a right as a person in the media to say, well, maybe the public can't handle this information. I think they have a right to it. Obviously that does come with caveats, and I mean there are important caveats. So, for example, if the Garda Síochána had said to me that day, we would rather you don't publish this information for security or operational reasons, I wouldn't have done so, because I think it's important to be responsible and not impact on Garda operations. There are other considerations. If for example, I can't think of them now, but there are obviously, not necessarily in this case, but like when it comes to court reporting or naming people, there might be a consideration. A good example is around if somebody has died, for example, not putting out identifying information until you're sure that his family or her family is involved. Yeah. That's another example. There are valid ethical considerations about when to release information. And then there is this new consideration, which the press apparently seem to be trying to adopt, which is, well, what if it might cause the public to react in a particular way? And what I said on the show, and what I'd stand over, is if we are all we hear in this country is about misinformation and disinformation and fake news and all the rest of it. And by the way, I know what's going to be an example of that now for the next 5 years. But if we're now saying that true information can't be published, well, we're going into a whole new realm altogether. And that seems to be the position, that you have a duty to suppress true information if it's in the interests of public order. And that is, I think, a very dangerous precedent to set. Because what if, for example, we had a story, and we don't, and this is purely hypothetical, but what if we had a story that suggested that a prominent politician was engaged in some incredibly scandalous behavior? Let's say, corruption or drugs or child sex abuse, whatever. And there's a risk when you publish that of the public not reacting well to it. There's a risk of a protest or a flash mob or whatever you want to call it. Does that mean you suppress that information as well? If that's a consideration in your reporting information, then that is the exact same logic that every oppressive regime in the world uses. I mean, the North Koreans and the Russians and the Chinese in their non-democratic states, the reason they use for suppressing information is that it's injurious to public order. So if you knew that the party was behaving in a particular way, you might not support the party, therefore the information shouldn't be reported. And this is the exact same logic now being applied in Ireland. And I find it astounding that is a position that serious people are apparently taking. Except I don't find it astounding. I kind of find it depressingly predictable. I think that this is the direction of travel, and I think it's a dangerous one.
And so, theoretically, a year from now, you won't be able to give your opinion unless it's sanitized such that it fits in. It omits anything that anybody could possibly deem to be hateful, which is undefined. but the information you receive from media will also be sanitized by somebody you don't know to decide what is and isn't suitable for you to hear.
Yeah, and I mean, it's terrifying the number of journalists who are embracing that idea. And it's one of the reasons they're so gleeful today, I think, in relation to our error. By the way, I want to say I do think it's really important that you apologize for errors, but I want to note that in media it's a depressingly rare thing, which is why I think it's important, because a lot of errors just don't get apologized for. There are many.
No, I
mentioned them some earlier on, but I think there are too many journalists who are buying into this idea that they have some role, like that they're important enough to be critical to public order. I'm sorry, but if you think that Gript Media and Bamberg are powerful enough to stomp our feet like Pompeii Magnus so that legions of rioters will spring up all over Dublin, that is in its own way flattering, but it's utter nonsense. I mean, 75% of people in this country believe that immigration is too high. I would love if they were all Gript readers, but they're not. People are coming to that conclusion by themselves.
Like, that's what I was saying earlier on. Do you have a little pipe that you play and then they all just come, like, it's absurd. But it's great as well, because it's a great deflection from having conversations that are difficult. It's easy to pile on and round on somebody else and create a common enemy. It's way easier to do that than to have difficult conversations with, and as I said before, politics is about having conversations that are difficult. It's about having conversations with people you don't like. It's about finding commonality with people you don't like. It's about bringing people along. All those things. That's what you're supposed to.
I thought on that show, actually, because conversation's an interesting word here. I thought on that show, obviously there were parts of it that went viral, but I thought the piece to me that almost nobody paid attention to, which was the most revealing, was when James Lawless, and I'm paraphrasing James here, but he basically said that he found certain section of the population very difficult to talk to, that they wouldn't accept the assurances government were giving in relation to various migration proposals or migrant centres around the country, and that it was very difficult to get the message across to people, and they weren't taking it in. And I thought it kind of summed up the mindset. And the mindset kind of is, we'll have a conversation, but only if you agree with us in the end. Like, there's no acceptance in the political class that this conversation might end with the political class having to come to an accommodation with the people. It is always the people must be educated, the people must take on board what we are saying, and then the people must show that they are mature and responsible citizens by agreeing with us. Like that is the attitude and the mindset.
And that's the essence of, and that's why this week, I was thinking about this a lot yesterday or the day before. I was driving and I was thinking a lot about, like, you just touched on something there, which is that you have a government and a media who really believe that they're the enlightened ones, and that the people who don't agree with them are not.
Oh, that underpins it.
But the problem with that, and again, like, not to go back to the really cynical reintroduction of the hate speech bill or whatever, is if you take the two leaders, for example, of government, which is Leo, and you just take this, and there's lots of people who listen to this podcast who are in agreement on the abortion issue. There's people who aren't, but it's actually not important what side you fall down on this, right? The point I'm going to make is that in not that long ago, both Leo and Micheál Martin were publicly pro-life. Then, over time, they went on a journey, right? And lots of people in politics went on this journey, right? And I come from a family, I don't know if I've ever said this on the podcast, but, like, my parents are very pro-choice. That's their opinion. I'm not. I'm pro-life. I voted no. They voted yes. That's fine. We don't agree. I consider my parents to be what I would call, not today, but like old-fashioned liberals, in that they have like that natural curiosity about why other people think a certain way.
Your father was a progressive politician in Ireland before it was fashionable to be a progressive politician in Ireland.
Exactly.
To his credit, and I'm not sucking up to your dad, but like, because I wouldn't have agreed with him on a lot, but he took stances, particularly in the political party that he was in, that were liberal and out of step with, I think, the majority of the population. And I obviously disagreed with him on many of those, but he did it from a sincere conviction. And
that's and that's absolutely fine. And it's like, if you're a real liberal and you have children, you know, you have to accept that you roll the dice and some of your children will have different views from you, and you're committed. If you're a true liberal, that's what happens, and that's great, and that's fine. And my dad and I agree on more than we disagree on, but we you know, we have it out and we talk and we have different opinions, and that's fine. That's what a liberal, in my opinion, used to be. When you refer to liberals these days, I don't see that at all. I think my dad has a lot of friends as well, his age group, that I'm very good, you know, I've grown up with and I'm very close with, and I consider them to be very similar, very like naturally curious about what other people think, and interested in the views of others. You don't have to agree, that's fine. You're still friends at the end of it. You have it out, whatever. But what I think has happened, and so if you go back to the referendum, Micheál and Leo, I'll use as two examples. They were pro-life, then they went on this journey, and the journey's fine. And like, I've changed my opinion on loads of things over the years, not something like that, but fine. But I have changed my opinions on things, and I look back on what I thought when I was 25 or 30, and now I'm 40, and I have different views on things. Fine. The issue I have with these so-called journeys is, my observation is the not the journey, but the contempt that started to be shown for the people who had the same view you had a week ago. Mm-hmm. That suddenly you're enlightened and they're not, and it's not you've no interest in bringing them along because you're now enlightened and they're left behind, and you have this kind of sneering contempt for them as being some kind of backward thing for a view that you had yourself only a short while ago. And then that kind of goes along, and then I was thinking about like things like COVID, and it was like, we're not going to go over the COVID thing again, but there was this kind of contempt for people who ask questions. You were the government, everyone was the enlightened one, the decision that we were enlightened, and anybody who didn't think that was the other way. And now we're seeing more, and I'm just like thinking, like noticing that there's just this attitude in government. You just touched on it there, which is, we're the morally superior enlightened ones, and it's such a drag to have to teach you Neanderthals how to think like us. And like, we'll try to do it, but ultimately anybody who's complaining about any decisions we're making is, you know, racist or this, or, you know, pick the issue, and there's always the wrong side to be on. And it's a contempt for people who think differently. It's the contempt I have a problem with. I have no problem with people having different views from me. That's fine. But I don't have contempt for people. And I'm not, and I'm also just a person who's talking to you on a podcast who's a political hack. I'm not the leader of a country. You're not the leader of the people who agree with you. You're the leader of the country. You're the leader of the people who are rioting in the city centre, whether you like it or not. So you either bring them along or you keep doing what you're doing. And the group of people that you're alienating and who don't like you and don't agree with you is growing by the day. Keep calling them names and keep having this contempt for them, and see what happens in the next general election. And we'll see. We know what's going to happen in the next general election, because particularly in Fine Gael, the people are dropping off and not running left, right, and centre. So they smell what's about to happen, and they're leaving because they don't want to deal with it.
I couldn't agree with you more. And as we were talking there, I was trying to think, because like, I think one of the hardest things to define in this country is what far right is. But I think you could make a good stab at a definition of far right if you just said a person who believes everything that Leo Varadkar believed in 2010. That would be a good definition, because like, I remember Leo was off to my right. My views have not substantially changed over the last decade. I mean, they've maybe gotten more nuanced in certain areas, and obviously the issues have changed and so on. But I remember in 2010, like I was, and I've always been something of a liberal on gay rights, for example. I was broadly in favour of gay marriage. Leo Varadkar was against it. I was pro-life. He was pro-life. I still am. He's not. He was talking about cracking down on social welfare abuse. I still think that's a good idea. He's apparently ditched it. I thought that immigration was needed to be better controlled. He did too. He's ditched that. I mean, you go down through the list of issues, and if you want a good definition of far right in this country, it's somebody who believed basically what the Taoiseach of this country believed a decade ago, and expressed.
Exactly. And this is the problem. Like, this is why I was thinking about it, is that this is the problem as well with the hate speech bill, which is that if you look at the journey these politicians have been on and how fast their views have progressed, and we want them to be able to make a decision, we want people like that to be able to make a decision on what is defined as hate in the future, 5 years from now. How could we possibly trust people who keep changing, who have such ideological journeys all the time? How could we possibly allow them to put a law in that will tell us what somebody else is deciding what hateful means?
Yeah, well, it just strikes. You know what I mean? It just
because, like, it's the moral superiority and the contempt for people that, like, is scary to me, and it was on that show when you were on it the other night, and it's leaking out of, it's politicians rolling their eyes when they're asked hard questions by Gript. It's everywhere. And it's a contempt. It's the only word I can think of for it. It's a contempt, and it's the we're enlightened and you plebs are all just Neanderthals who aren't as educated and don't know how the world works like we do. And maybe sometimes we'll try and talk to you. And maybe some at some point you'll see sense. But no political progress is ever made by somebody going into a room and thinking that they're the enlightened one and the other one just needs to be schooled better on how to think like them. Never has progress been ever made by people like that. That's the point about, as I was saying, about liberals, my dad, his friend, other people, true liberals. They got progress done because they were willing to concede points and accept that other people had different views, didn't make them crap people.
Mm-hmm. Look,
and I'm ranting.
You're ranting, but like, I haven't been interrupting you because it's been a good and a clarifying and important rant. I mean, that is the problem. I wrote a piece for The Critic in the UK this week, in which I said the big problem with Ireland is that we've got a political class that doesn't really like the people. Like, it doesn't. And one of the things that strikes me, because I've been doing a fair bit of driving this week as well, so I've been listening to the radio more often than not, is the sheer number of ads from government agencies telling people what's wrong with them. You're eating too much. There was one on this week about, like, young fellas and consent, and, like, you're
I heard it. I heard it in the car today. That's so weird. You just said that, because I was like, what was the ad I heard today that was so weird? Because it's not really clear as you're listening to it going on what it's about.
Yeah.
So it's all these examples, and I was like, "What's this now?" Yeah, I heard it.
Yeah, and like, you're eating too much, or you're flying too much, you're using too many plastics, you're too fat, you're not fat enough. It's endless. This government money that's spent telling us what's wrong with us all day, every day, on every radio station. And it feeds into that sense that if they could just get rid of the public and get one in that was compliant and agreed with James Lawless when he told them that immigration into their local towns was good for them, they'd be much happier. And I do think as well, like, it's more than just a sort of general dislike of the people. There's a real intolerance of the people, because, like, I just think it's fascinating that Conor McGregor is allegedly, per the reporting of Mike O'Toole in the Daily Star, and I don't know if it actually I don't know if it was Michael's report, but it was the Daily Star, that Conor McGregor is now under criminal investigation for hate speech for using the phrase "Ireland is at war." I just think that's fascinating. I mean, I don't agree with Conor McGregor that Ireland is at war. I don't see any tanks around the place, but that's hate speech. But then, later on today, or it was actually yesterday, the 29th of November, we had a Fianna Fáil councillor in Limerick he says he was referring to the attacker last week, but certainly everyone who was listening to him in the council seems to believe he was talking about the rioters, that people should be shot or indeed beaten to death. And he is not facing any kind of criminal investigation. Like, one of them, two statements. One of them is milder, but the other one is directed against sort of like, people who the government doesn't like. And so the milder one is subject to criminal investigation, and the one that is sort of more aggressive is, I think, Fianna Fáil have promised to have a word with him. And I think that's very telling. Because if those two statements are put beside each other, one of them, I think, in my opinion, is objectively more likely to incite violence than the other. Do you think I'm wrong?
No, I don't think you're wrong at all. I mean, I think Conor McGregor we discussed it last week. I mean, last week we were kind of saying, we were kind of talking about how we're not particular fans of Conor McGregor, but, some of the stuff he was saying. And now I think he's gotten a bit kind of emboldened by power and he's kind of going a bit mad, to be honest.
Yeah, but no, I'm going to challenge you on that because I think it's not that I'm pro Conor McGregor. I'm sure
I know
there are
that.
many things that he agree with. But like, he's striking a chord with people. These if the tweets he was sending were getting like 3 likes and like one person and like 50 people were replying going, Conor, that's a disgraceful thing to say, there'd be no chat about this. The only reason people are concerned is because they're going mega viral and his replies are full of people going, finally, Conor, somebody's saying fair play to you, stand up, man, woohoo. That's the only reason that people that there's concern over these. He could be saying the exact same stuff and have the exact same number of followers and no one would care. The only reason they care is because it's resonating with a section of the population because he's the only one saying it. And he's the only one saying it perhaps in the kind of language that like, people outside of politics and media use, plain spoken language. That's like
no, and I mean, I'm fully aware that he's capturing the imagination of people who are, back to my point, have been treated, a lot of them, with contempt by the political establishment for a long time. I just don't think Conor McGregor is the answer. And I think that he, initially I was like, yeah, he's capturing the imagination or whatever. And then it's just getting a bit kind of, I don't know.
Yeah, but so here's the thing. Look,
getting a bit uncomfortable, to say the least.
If you were going to give me a list of people who I think should be the answer to Ireland's problems, Conor McGregor wouldn't make the top 50, and that is not having a go.
Thousand, John.
But that said, like, somebody has to. One of the things about what we're talking about, which is sort of like the looking down on people and making people feel bad for saying various things or thinking various things, is that eventually you get down to people who have nothing to lose. Conor McGregor doesn't have anything to lose. Ireland didn't make him, so Ireland can't unmake him. He's got nothing to lose. So he is somebody who can say the things that a lot of people maybe are thinking or feeling and have no consequences for it. But I know for a fact that he's not in his own. I know for a fact that he's not in his own. And when I say that, I'm not talking about like the people in his Twitter replies. I'm talking about relatively prominent people in Irish society who agree with him but don't feel like they can articulate those views, even if they were likely to articulate them in a more polite, friendly, middle class way. And I think that as a result of that, you're left with Conor McGregor. For better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, you're left with Conor McGregor, and that's a situation that the political class have created. Because when you say to everyone else, well, these are terrible things to say and no respectable person would say them, then they start worrying about their jobs and their careers and their income streams. So it's left to somebody either who, in the case of maybe some of the rioters, didn't have an income stream to lose, or in the case of Conor McGregor, doesn't really have to worry about what the Irish Times can do to his bank balance. And
it's not that he's got nothing. It's not that he's got nothing to lose. It's that he's uncancelable, and the punishment for people who speak out in past is to be cancelled. And so he's uncancelable, so he can say what he likes.
Yeah, and I think if you don't want Conor McGregor tweeting Ireland is at war, then you've got to create space in the conversation for people who will articulate the concerns of a large section of the population in a way that's more acceptable to you. Like, that's just politics 101, and they're absolutely refusing to do it. I mean, with the Irish political establishment, it's an our way or the highway attitude. That, like, I was on TV. Sorry, Virgin Media wasn't my. I nearly said TV3. Virgin Media, it was not my only media appearance this week. I was also down in Limerick, appearing on a local Limerick radio station last night, just having a conversation with their listeners and with various people who are texting into the show. And the anger, Sarah, is palpable out there. And it's about stuff that, like, you wouldn't think. It's about things like the treatment of self-employed people. It's about the kind of the lack of services, the lack of rural policing, the feeling that, like, they've been completely abandoned and, like, everything has gotten worse. Their schools have gotten worse. Their hospitals have gotten worse. Their communities have gotten less safe. They're not being listened to, and every time they speak up, they feel like people from Dublin are looking down on them for their accents and the way they speak. Like, and that feeling is there, and they don't know who to vote for, who to listen to, and basically nobody in the political system is speaking for them, and they're not a small group. And I think that what happened in Dublin is sort of a crystallization of the anger of a great many people. And most of those people, of course, wouldn't smash windows and they wouldn't go rioting, and they would abhor that kind of behavior. But they understand the anger, they understand it, and they feel it, and they share it, and they object to being told that they're kind of wrong to think it. And there's a simmering resentment out there in the population that's not being addressed. And there's going to be more of this stuff if it's not addressed.
What was your take on Mary Lou sharing the photo of the man outside the school? So just if somebody listening doesn't know about this, Mary Lou, the school cloister where the horrific incident took place last week, when the kids went back to school, was it yesterday morning? There was a man sitting on the steps of the school, intoxicated. That be right, John?
Yes.
And Mary Lou tweeted a photo saying it was disgraceful that the kids were going back to school and that, they were met with this going back to school. What was your take on that?
I understand why she did it, and I understand why she got criticized. And I think you have to kind of look at it in the round. I think, first of all, I think we live in a very visual society. People don't see things they don't believe. So if you tell them that you just tell somebody and you describe orally that there was a person in a sort of bad way sitting outside a school as those kids went back to school, their imaginations run riot, but they can't really picture it. But the picture, tells 1,000 words. So I understand why she did it, and I also understand why the thing that was pictured made a lot of people, I presume, I haven't spoken to them, so I don't know, but I presume made a lot of parents in that school angry. So I completely get that. On the other hand, I do understand the criticisms that this is a vulnerable person who might be identifiable, who is obviously in a bad way and has nowhere else to go. So I mean, what do you do with that person? And he's been failed by Irish society, hugely failed by Irish society. If he's in that position in the middle of the day, that the whole situation is just, and I think it encapsulates the sense that's present in the North Inner City and a lot of other parts of the country that all the social problems have been dumped upon them. And basically they've been told, well, that guy is your problem. Well, sorry, he's not. He's a government policy problem. So on balance, I think she was right to do it. I think criticism of her was actually relatively muted. I mean, can you imagine if Mattie McGrath had tweeted that? I think there would have been much more rounded condemnation of him. But she's on the left, so she can get away with it a little bit more, I think. But it does encapsulate that area. One of the things we have heard from people in the Parnell Street area Parnell Square area in the last week is just how abandoned they feel. And I'm not talking about people who go there for work, because obviously it's a busy part of the city centre, but there are residential areas around that. They're generally poor, they're generally deprived, and they kind of feel like they've just been left to rot. And that feeling is real. And I think Mary Lou will probably do very well in those ballot boxes at the next election.
I think there's loads of problems. I mean, I was in town yesterday, drove in for something yesterday morning to O'Connell Street from Malahide. It was an hour and 40 minutes to get in and an hour and 40 minutes to get back for 12 kilometres, I think, is Dublin city centre to Malahide. It was...
For listeners who don't know, I can get to Dublin in an hour and 40 minutes from Tipperary.
Yeah, so I was furious about that. The whole of, the bottom of the Malahide Road and it's been roadworks for, it must be going on 2 years. You can't go this way, you can't go that way. This road is closed out. They've made just complete mess of the city. I parked in Q Park. I got there at about 9:15. I left at 4. It was €33 to park there. You know what I mean? There was just the smell of urine and, just in general, it was just a thoroughly unpleasant experience. I think that there's so many problems in the North Inner City at the moment, and nobody seems to want to grab the nettle. So I don't know. There's multiple elements to this, and obviously what happened last week is on a scale of its own and a completely different thing. But I think that there's a lot of problems and people are angry about a lot of things. And like I said, just being gaslit all the time is just not working.
No, it's not. So, as you say, you said at the start of the show, it's been a fairly depressing week. And from my point of view, obviously some of that was self-inflicted. So it's been doubly depressing. But I think it's important to recognize that, like, there are people in this country with real problems at the moment. And there's just this sense, and I get it everywhere. I mean, the last couple of weeks, I have had people coming up to me in the street. That has never happened to me in my life, Sarah. Ever. I have never had people coming up to me in the street before. Like, except maybe in an exceptional case, like if I was on television and the very next day somebody might recognize me and say, you were good on TV or you were bad on TV. I've never had people coming up to me on the street and say, are you John McGurk? And just start to tell me what they think about what's going on in the country. That's happened to me, like, I think 7 times over the last 3 weeks. People, and it's been people of all ages. The youngest guy was in his 20s and the oldest was a lady in her 70s, and they were all saying the same thing, which is like, we just like feel like the country is adrift, and you know, and there's a feeling they're not being told things as well. So it's a funny time to live, and it's you know, I think what happened last week has shaken up a lot of people as well.
Yeah, definitely. There's a feeling of, like I said it last week, just, you know, maybe in a part naive, but that kind of event I thought was not a thing that was going to happen in Dublin, and now it has. So there's an innocence that's kind of gone now, and it's just a bit scary.
Do you think? Just to talk about general media coverage of it, do you think that? Because I'll tell you one thing that people have said to me repeatedly, is that they kind of feel like the media coverage in general, and I think this is why before Thursday this week, Gript was having a very strong week in terms of like new social media followers and new people signing up for our subscription service and everything. I think there's a sense in the country with this attack, and I'm not saying anyone is doing anything wrong, but there's a sense that like the focus is in the wrong place or something. Like, that people are really interested in what happened, how it came to happen, what the prognosis is for the victims, and instead they're just getting this diet about the riots from the media. And I'm really picking up a sense,
the far right, and if you see anything far right on Twitter, report it to the Gardaí.
I'm really picking up a sense that there's like, you know, there's like where the priorities of the press and the politicians are wrong here, and that people are kind of feel like they're being told explicitly what to care about when they care about something entirely different, which is sort of like the you know, it's like it's like that moment, but it's more extreme. Do you remember after the Aisling Murphy thing, where we had like a week and a half of all Irish men need to be better? And people were like, well, just tell us what happened, why it happened, and who did it. And the press were like, no, but first we need to tell you that all Irish men need to be better. Like, it's a similar moment, but I would argue even more extreme in terms of the reaction it's provoking in people. And, you know, I just feel like there's a bit of an echo chamber going on with the media. That's my sense. But like you and I mean, Sarah and I, for listeners, I mean, we talk very regularly, but like we're not in daily communication, and we have very different lives. So like, are you picking up anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of people who are really naturally, you know, worried and curious about the victims and what happened, and there's very little reporting about that. I've definitely had people ask me about that.
The number one question we've received at Gript this week has been about the condition of the little girls, and you know, people have delved into, like, some people have actually gone down the road of, you know, is she even alive? The answer to that is that she is, and that all that's being said is that she's in a very serious condition, and there are great concerns about her safety. But even at that, it seems
really
to me
that's all that matters. I mean, that should be that's all that matters. You know what I mean?
But it almost seems like, I mean, I read an Irish Times piece, and I can't remember who it was by, but it was during the week, and like there was a detail on the little girl, but it was like in paragraph 15 or something. When I think that should really be in paragraph 1. And I don't know why that is. I don't know why it's being shoved so far down the news agenda. I mean, if we're going to talk about this story, she's the most important person in it. And yet the public are not really being kept appraised of her condition, even if it's just there are no updates, still in a serious condition at all. And I think, like, I'm picking up that people are kind of noticing that and getting concerned about it. And it's quite strange what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I there's more to run in this. Put it that way. I think we'll see. But I mean, like I said, the most important thing is that she's okay. And like I'm constantly thinking about a mother like me, you know, just making every bargain with God or whoever that she's okay. And it's just horrendous, and that's kind of been forgotten a bit. At the end of the day, somebody's whole world fell apart when they got a call to say that their child had been violently attacked, and the families of the carer and the other children, of course. But you know, there's been a huge life-changing event for somebody, and you know, that should be the focus.
Completely, 100%. Anyway, it's been a bit of a somber podcast this week, folks. It's been for reasons of the news, for reasons of my own role in the news this week, unfortunately. And you know, but it's sometimes we're going to have episodes like this. So from Sarah and myself, thank you so much for listening. Special thanks this week to everyone who subscribes to and supports Gript, because this week we needed it more than ever, because we made a mistake. And sometimes that's going to happen. And when it does happen, it's important to own up to it. And I take full responsibility as editor for that mistake having happened. And I can only promise you that it will not happen again. However, that said, we move on, we pick ourselves up, we dust ourselves down, and we will be back next week for another edition of The Week That Really Was. Thanks a million for listening.